I'm going to give them for this a clean, straight 10 out of 10. I think they've
Oh!
absolutely nailed
Oh!
it.
10 out of 10!
Yeah,
Oh!
I cannot see an error here. I think they've
Oh!
nailed it. And welcome back, everyone, to 40k Fireside. This is episode 27, and I'm back in action. I missed the last one. David and Yokel did an incredible overview of the Tyranid datasheet, so I definitely recommend you check that out. We're starting to get lots more new information coming into 10th, and we thought maybe this is the time that we, start doing a bit more analysis, dig deep into what's out there, and see if we can share our initial thoughts from kind of our perspective as competitive players. So yeah, I'm here with Dave. Dave,
Yeah.
what are you thinking? How are you feeling about 10th? How's things coming together for you?
Ooh, I'm excited. I'm really hoping that there's a tournament called Bristol, which is going to be at the end of the month. I'm really hoping that's going to be 10th edition. If it is 10th edition, I'm going to go and play it. But if it's 9th edition, honestly, it's not anywhere near as exciting for me personally. But, that's the shift. We had that at Las Vegas where we had a lot of rules come out and there'd be a vote. But I think this one's a little bit different. There's a lot less to play for, and there's a lot more excitement for a new edition. Everyone's kind of on the same playing field. So I'm really excited for it. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far from 10th edition. If I'm being honest, it's a mixed bag, I think, in terms of there's some big hits and there's some really big misses, I think, and the way that the rules team has designed some of the rules. And then the data sheets, I think, is a lot more even. But we'll cover them as they keep coming out. Like you said, we did the Tyranid data sheets yesterday, which was good. I think if you're excited about Tyranids, then you might be slightly disappointed. I think that they are still potentially in the naughty corner. GW haven't really taken the opportunity to push what is going to be one of their frontline boxes that they're going to sell, which on a side point is kind of interesting because they have a lot of new model releases, but I don't actually think the datasheets in those have been pushed that much, if at all. In fact, there's some datasheets, the Synapse kind of Termagant things that are I don't really see when you would play them. So, so it's interesting. A little bit of a different perspective. Like, you remember we had the Indomitus box where everything in that was busted. In fact, you could literally just go to a GT with your Indomitus box and win. So, maybe times have changed, but we'll have to see what the Space Marine, or we do know what the Space Marine side of that is like, but we'll have to see what all the Space Marine data sheets look like. But anyway, as you can tell, I'm rambling on. We're excited, but today we're going to be covering two topics. First of all, we're going to cover a decision made by a relatively small GT. I don't want to blow this out of proportion, to preemptively ban Aeldari from their tournament. We think that's a really interesting topic to discuss. And then we're going to be chatting through secondaries. So there's a lot of content out there right now around core rules and everything like that, but we want to take it piecemeal at a time and provide some purely competitive analysis on how to win the game from the new secondaries that have been spoiled. And this is from a document called Leviathan Games, which I think has been put together based on some of the games that they've played. So that's where we're going to be kicking it off. Vic, I'm going to put you in the out of the pan and into the fire. You can do the first hot take, because I've already written something on social media about this, which I'll probably just be reiterating. But so just for context, there is a tournament. I think it's called
Bugeater GT.
Bugeater GT, and they've made the preemptive decision to ban Aeldari at their tournament because their tournament is more or less on release day, and that's their decision. It's called Bugbear.
Bugbear. Oops, sorry.
What's your take on this, Vic?
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is such a multi-layered discussion because it actually involves a lot of kind of history of competitive 40K,
Definitely.
the progression of people's opinions and Games Workshop's responses across ninth edition. And, there's a positive and a negative to this. I think the obvious negative, which I mean, this topic has blown up on kind of discussion forums. And the obvious negative is people are asking, look, you guys don't know the points. You don't know the entire meta. You don't know the majority of data sheets in both the faction you're banning and the rest of the armies. And yet you're making this decision. Now, that's a negative, but I would also add the caveat that it's very likely, and I don't want to get anyone in trouble because I don't know, but I think a lot of people have access to the majority of data sheets
Yep.
and the points and the whole picture, and they're able to pass on information to people close to them, even if it's not specifics, just the overarching kind of themes of things.
Yep.
And everything I've heard from any source, from anywhere, first hand, second hand, third hand, everyone makes a face when you talk about Eldari and their level of balance initially.
Yes.
And the overwhelming majority of people are suggesting that, look, they need some kind of a correction or there will be a significant imbalance in the game. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that these guys at the GT would not have made this decision without having some level of information like that. Now, that brings me into the positive of this kind of a response. The fact that a tournament organizer of a kind of medium/small size GT has the ability to say, look, I want to do what's best for my event, and I want to create an environment which is better for the majority of people there. I think this might be the start of something that is potentially a little bit good in the community, that
Yeah.
we won't just sit back and accept something broken released by GW.
Mm.
And that would be the thing which I'd say people need to step back and look at the bigger picture here and realize that instead of focusing your dislike and distaste towards the TOs who are trying to do their best in this situation, maybe you should look at what's actually causing this problem. Why are we accepting Games Workshop creating broken armies and not even doing anything about it, and then blaming people for when they're trying to kind of fix it for their community?
Yeah.
You should be directing this attention towards GW.
Yep. I think you're spot on, and it's really good to break it down into pros and cons. From my perspective, I see it from a couple of angles. One, I completely agree that if you're listening to this podcast, and you don't really know the conversations that happen, kind of at the level, if you're a regular tournament organizer, or if you're just not even on Discord or something like that, there's plenty of information out there. And if you if you live under a rock, competitively speaking, and you genuinely believe that Aeldari won't be broken, then I will correct you right there. It would be extremely busted. And you don't actually need any information that hasn't been previewed already in the public. The best combination of this is the support platform with the what's it called, the D cannon, which has indirect fire and devastating wounds. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out that you shoot someone, you make a wound roll a 6, and you can make a damage roll a 6, and you can do that with multiple mechanisms in the army. Your damage then, your opponent does not get a save, and your damage instantly converts to mortal wounds. Now, that is extremely powerful. That's also combined with the fact that it's a 24-inch range gun with indirect, and there's a new stratagem called Overwatch that you can trigger when your opponent moves within range of your army. So you have 9 support platforms that cover all the objectives. Whenever your opponent moves into range of any of them, you can Overwatch them for 1 CP in the charge and the movement phase, and you're likely just to spill over a bunch of mortal wounds and table your opponent. Now, that's 9 models in your army. You get all your rest of your army too. So let there be no discussion around how busted this is. It's extremely busted. That's just for context.
Yep, absolutely. Now, and it doesn't just take one, like that. That's the only thing we've seen, Dave.
Yeah.
But I remember when we discussed the previews.
Yeah.
And we kind of came to the conclusion that the Eldar rules, their base special abilities and rules, will mean that it's impossible to balance that faction correctly at this stage. And it's not just going to be the decans. There's going to be more than that in that faction.
Yeah, I completely agree. So going on to the pros and cons, I think one of the cons is, you could understand from a customer perspective that perhaps if you've looked at this GT from afar and said, that's the first 10th GT, I'm going to go there, play my Eldar, and travel and book a hotel. Now, I completely understand that sucks if the TO says, we're not going to allow Eldar at this event. So I think that's a big con. And I think the way that they could have fixed that is actually, there's clearly some very busted things in the codex, very specific units. I think they could have taken a little bit more of a nuanced approach and said, we're not going to allow support platforms to be played at our tournament. That, I think, in and of itself, would have covered 60 to 70% of the issues, and you would have had a win on both sides of the fence on that one. Players could still come and play their Eldar, and people could still come and not get completely steamrolled off the board, even when they move their models. That would have been good. One of the pros for this is that it harkens back to, obviously, the release of Votann, where this is where the first time this happened. And This is an excellent piece of positive reinforcement learning. When you teach your you teach your dog how to do something, do a trick, and you feed it a treat, and you go, well done, that's how you did it, and then that's how you positively reinforce something to learn how to do certain behaviors. Now, when we first saw the release of Votan, everyone knew that it was going to be busted. We had a more complete picture, but the picture is complete enough to do the same analysis here as well. Now, tournaments have realized that actually this is a direct way to communicate with Games Workshop, and this is a direct mechanism which you can have input and get output. So if we say, hey, look, we're going to ban it, it's not acceptable, this is clearly a way that you as a community and us as a community can give feedback to Games Workshop, because in all seriousness, it's very difficult to give receptive feedback to Games Workshop. They have no avenues in which they appear to reply. They are not open about what their kind of change process is or their roadmaps. Playtesters don't seem to have much of an opinion. So as far as I'm concerned, Games Workshop deserve everything they get in this quarter, because they don't involve TOs in the process of running their tournament. And as a tournament organizer, it's your responsibility, I believe, if I would organize a tournament, to make sure your attendees have the best possible experience, right? They're trying to cover the majority of people at their event. And if they believe that it's going to make people have a horrible experience or it's going to taint their tournament, then they're well within their rights to organize their tournament how they see fit. And if you don't want to go to that tournament as a customer, then don't go. And that's the decision we make. We make that decision on an everyday basis for every other company that we interact with, whether it be where you buy your groceries or what type of alcohol you buy or something, for example. And that's just the way that business runs. So just because it's the game that we beloved and play and put so much effort into, it doesn't operate outside the commercial environment that everything else does as well. Sorry, rant over.
No, that was beautiful, man. I think you've hit all of the main points there. I mean, we will get a complete picture on the 15th and 16th of June when we get the Xenos data sheets, and then we get the points. Oh, well, this is what we're assuming. Everything's followed that leaked kind of progression so far. Let's assume it carries on. So if by the 16th we get points and all the Xenos data sheets and we realize that, Eldar are absolutely busted, then, the Bugeater GT, this GT Bugbear GT would have done the right thing here to make the decision that unless there's an FAQ, this army should not be played. Everyone will have a better tournament. Great.
But you know what? Props to Bugbear. I'm gonna put it out there. It can't be easy to release something to do this, because if you do that, you're gonna get a lot of flack. Something's gonna happen. You're gonna get a lot of shit. And, it's not an easy thing to do. I don't think they took this decision lightly. If someone just thinks, oh, they rocked up, oh, yeah, fuck that, it's broken, ban it. No, they probably thought about it a lot and knew that this would kind of blow up, as it did with Votan as well. Mm-hmm. And it's not an easy thing to do, I don't think.
Yeah, 100%. So we'll see how it all pans out. And we'll also see, because they did say if there is an FAQ, Eldari can be played.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it was specifically said, if there is no FAQ, Eldari is banned. If there is an FAQ, Eldari are fine. Yep. So we'll see if there is a day one FAQ on Eldari, and GW, if it is broken, would be very well placed to make some corrections using the time they've had to consider it more.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. So, yeah. All right, with that, we're going to cut to some jazz music, and then we're going to go over secondary play for 10th edition. Our first kind of takes on it, and we've had a little bit of time to digest it. So sit back and relax, and we'll be with how you're going to score primary and secondaries and win the game.
Okay, let's do some chat about secondaries, Dave. We've got this. So we haven't played any test games. So this is kind of us analyzing things, and I find the more and more experience we get, the more ability we have to do this in a more accurate fashion. So I listened to the Stat Check podcast, and Innes and crew went through this really, really well. I really like the way Innes analyzes things. A lot of the stuff he says really kind of agrees with me as well. So I'm going to try and kind of give my twist on everything, and Dave too. But first of all, a little bit of background on how secondaries work. how we're used to with secondary missions in ninth edition is we kind of pick 3 secondaries before the game start. We show our opponent, and you guys both play to those secondaries across the entire game. It's changed a little bit for 10th edition, where we now have a pack of 16 cards, and each of those cards will have a different secondary mission on it. Some of them will... 1 second, Dave, pause there.
No problem. Boom. I'm actually not going to pause it. We're just going to keep rolling, and we're just going to...
Okay, and I'm back. Okay, so a number of these missions will seem similar to you. Engage on all fronts behind enemy lines with slightly different kind of achievement categories, achievement criteria. But essentially, you play through these 16 cards in one of 2 different fashions. One is called a fixed set of missions, and that set of missions is very similar to what we have now. You go through your deck and you pick 2 of the potential 8 fixed missions. Is it 8, Dave?
Yes, it's 8. So the 16 is split into, effectively, fixed and tactical. And if you select 2 cards to play for the entire battle round or the entire game, you can only pick 2 from the tacticals, from the fixed section, sorry.
Perfect. And they become your fixed missions for the entire game. Or you can play the new format of secondaries, which is using all 16 cards as tactical missions. And fundamentally, you just pick 2 cards per command phase. Oh, you draw 2 cards per command phase. And those are your tactical objectives until you achieve them. This is a really interesting twist to the format, and we've had an experience with this with Maelstrom of War in the past, but that was using a much larger deck than this. So this is kind of...
This is a completely different take on how to play the game. So this is there's so much to discuss here, even without talking about the secondaries. I'm going to avoid a huge conversation and rant that I could go into because I played a lot of Magic the Gathering competitively. What I will say is, I'll summarize this into 2 points before I go any further. If you are playing competitive Warhammer 40k, you should sleeve your 16 cards in a Magic the Gathering sleeve, for example. They should have no markings on the back of them. In addition, whenever you present your cards to your opponent to draw, they should be presented to cut. Your opponent should have the opportunity to shuffle them. For competitive reasons, your opponent should not look at your deck when they are shuffling or cutting your deck as well. There are so many ways and such a history of cheating when it comes to card manipulation and card deck shuffling that these are the standard procedures I believe we should get off on the right foot to implement to play the game on a fair and safe way. So put your cards in a sleeve, randomize them, don't look at your opponent's deck when you're cutting or shuffling them, and then we can get started. Right. Out the window.
No, that's perfect, man. Because look at how chess clocks have developed in the game. And we now have clock etiquette in competitive play. I'm sure we'll soon have card etiquette in competitive play as well, and it becomes the norm.
So the feature space is fixed. There's 16 possible objectives you can get, and we're going to be talking here about probably about random, because that's the most obvious one. Now, this harkens back to obviously Maelstrom cards, which I didn't play during that time, but were notoriously unbalanced in terms of, you picked this, you selected this, or you drew this one. Oh, that's the easiest one, 5 VP or something like that, right? Or I redrew that one again, 5 VP. Now, before we get into them, they're all pretty balanced. There are some that are a little bit more difficult to achieve, but over the look of things, the randomized ones are quite actually easy to achieve, I would say. Now, what happens is you've got your 16 cards. You draw, I believe, 3, and you discard 1.
Okay. So there are different mission rules. The base way of playing is, at the start of your command phase, you draw 2 cards, and those are your active secondary missions. There are 2 ways of manipulating the secondaries that you have. Well, 3. So one way is that when you score them, when you achieve the criteria on them, they're discarded. And then in your next command phase, you will draw another one to replace whatever has been completed. The second way is you can use a stratagem at the end of your command phase once per game. It's called the New Order Stratagem. It costs 1 command point unless you are playing a mission rule called Vox Static, which will increase it to costing 2 CP. And that allows you to discard one of your secondaries, so you can see your 2 secondaries. You discard 1 and draw a new one to replace it. Again, only once per battle.
But that's at the end of your command phase.
Correct, yeah. So you will be able to score it across that turn. And then the final way, which is actually quite powerful, is at the end of each player's turn, you can discard one or more of your active secondary mission cards, and you gain a CP for discarding it.
Yeah.
Which means that at your next command phase, you will draw and replace it. So you will be kind of, it would have to be one that you haven't completed, essentially.
Yes. And when you complete these missions, you redraw a new card as well, right? So you can't...
No, you only redraw it at the start of your command phase.
Oh, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but when you complete it, it goes away, and then you need to draw another card to try and achieve it.
There are two other things which change the number of cards you have. Now, these mission rules that we mentioned are ways of modifying your mission. So at the moment, we have certain mission rules like you can't deep strike on turn 1 with abandoned sanctuaries, and other ones where you kind of move the objectives around, things like that. Now, the two which are different are called targets of opportunity. And in this mission, instead of drawing 2 cards, you draw 3 cards. So you have 3 active secondaries. And if you're using fixed missions where you have 2 fixed ones, you also draw 1 additional in each of your command phases.
Wow.
And then the other one is called Maelstrom of Battle. So Maelstrom of Battle is the... Oh, no, is it Maelstrom of Battle? There is one where what you said happens, Dave, where... Yes, secret intel. In each player's command phase, the first time you draw secondary mission cards this phase, so not when you're using the stratagem for new orders, you can draw 1 additional secondary and then discard 1. So you basically draw 3, keep 2.
Yep. A little bit of a brainstorm there. Sorry, another Magic reference. That's kind of interesting. I really like how there are some missions where maybe if you would only take fixed, you're much more incentivized to take tactical. That's really cool. Secret intel is really powerful, and Maelstrom of Battle is really powerful. You are going to be scoring so many points on Maelstrom of Battle because you take fixed and you've got a game plan, and you get a random chance to get a tactical mission as well, which is really good. One thing we didn't go over is that you can score 100 points if you take fixed or tactical. Now, the way that these two things are broken down is that if you pick fixed, broadly speaking, if you pick fixed, you can pick obviously 8 of the 16, two out of the 8 of the 16. And these are fixed throughout the entire mission for you. You can score them from turn 1. And some of these you might be familiar with. One of them is Engage on All Fronts, which is now easier, but you have to score it from turn 1. And what's another one that we're used to here?
Behind enemy lines.
Behind enemy lines, or assassinate, bring it down, maybe.
Yep.
And, you might want to take fixed if your opponent is playing knights, for example, because you can bring it down for 20 points. Now, like I mentioned, you can get 100 points. And the way it's broken down is you get 50 primary, 40 secondary, and then you get 10 for just showing up to the table with your models painted. So if you're looking for the hundreds, you can still get that. But, and here's the big thing, the fixed and tactical missions, if you chose to draw random missions, which is a combination of fixed and tactical, there are certain criteria where if you complete a fixed mission, but you're actually drawing it randomly, you just straight up get more points, for example. So behind enemy lines, if you're using tactical missions, then if this secondary is achieved, you get an extra VP for a maximum of 5 VP instead of what would be 4 or 2. So you're getting 3 and then 5. So you do net more points. And I think broadly speaking, if you take fixed mission secondaries, you need to score them for almost the max every turn to get 20 on both and score 100 points total. So significantly more difficult. So I think those things like Assassinate will bring it down, where your opponent gives up 20, which it doesn't matter how many points you score in a turn, can potentially do that as well. So
definitely.
It's,
I think when we're discussing this, we should start off with the fixed objectives. Actually, I'm noticing, Dave, there's only 7 of them. So 7 are fixed and 9 are tactical only.
Oh, okay. Wow. Sorry.
And amongst the 7 fixed objectives, there are 4 which can be done regardless of your opponent's army, and 3 which involve interaction with your opponent's army.
Sure.
So kind of 4 more passive ones and 3 more aggressive ones.
Sure.
I think, when we all initially looked at this, we were like, oh, obviously we're going to go fixed. We're competitive players. We love a bit of consistency, but it's actually much more complex than that. But for people who are considering fixed, there are certain situations where I think it could come up. But maybe we should just start off going through some of the more passive ones, Dave.
Yeah.
So we've got behind enemy lines. So behind enemy lines is scored at the end of your turn, and if 2 or more of your army of your units are wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, you score 4 points. So
pretty
it's
similar to how it is at the moment, right?
exactly the same scoring at the moment. You score 4 points for 2 units. The only difference now is if you have 1 unit, you only score 2 points rather than currently we're scoring 3.
Yeah. So if you score that for 5 turns, 10 VP, which is half of what you could totally get.
Correct. Now, very interestingly, a lot of these have this little bit at the end, which is if you're using tactical missions, which is the non-fixed one, so you're drawing cards from the deck. When this secondary mission is achieved, you score 1 extra VP. So 1 unit would score you 3 and 2 units would score you 5 VP. So that's definitely a little bit of a benefit to going tactical.
Then I think, just to clarify, when Vic says passive, he means non-interactable. So if you're playing Eldar, for example, it's very difficult for your opponent to stop you from moving a Farseer into the middle of the board, then doing Warp Ritual, and then quickening it back behind your opponent's enemy lines, because it's such a small model and you can't block out your entire opponent's deployment zone. So.
And those secondaries have historically been very powerful and things that you build your game plan around. So like if you guys remember To the Last and things like that.
For sure. So I think the next passive one or non-interactable one historically has been very powerful, engage on all fronts. Now, this has changed a little bit. The qualifying units need to be in table quarters, and it's now 3 inches away from a table quarter, which I think is a good change. I think they've struck the right balance there. 6 inches was far too difficult to achieve. And then, just wholly within the table quarter was too easy. So 3 inches pushes you a little bit into your opponent's quarter, which is great there as well. Now, if you have, obviously you can do this from the start of the game. If you have, you get 4 VP if you have 4 units in different table quarters, or you get 2 VP if you've got 3 table quarters. Now, 3 table quarters is quite easy because obviously you can, have your deployment zone, which is usually 2, and then you drip feed 1 into a contested table quarter that your opponent might be in as well. What I've noticed with this one, though, is this is very interesting. While a unit is battle shocked, you cannot qualify to be in a table quarter, which is really interesting. But this has been massively buffed here. Now, there is, from what I can see, no conditions around what unit type or unit size can qualify for engage on all fronts. Now, this was very prevalent back when we had 6 planes, for example, on Admech, and we had the mighty Lictor from Tyranids, where you could just deep strike it, put it in a little corner. So it looks like it's back to being, whatever size models. So if you've got really fast, cheap single models that you can just throw away, potentially really strong. So I'd say, actually, now I'm just reflecting on it, this has been seriously buffed, and you get 1 more VP for each qualification if you draw this randomly as well.
Yeah, only having to be 3 inches away makes it much easier. And I think you're right, Dave. I think the game looks like it's shifting towards these little deep striking units that come in and score you points all over the places. We have Demons and GSC both with 3-inch deep strikes. We have Grey Knights with multiple deep strikes. We have a universal stratagem which allows you to deep strike or come from strat reserve in your opponent's turn, which then lets you move into a quarter if you need to. So I think Engage on All Fronts is a very strong one. Whether so we've talked about engage on all fronts and behind enemy lines, and that might be the combination that people might consider for fixed objectives.
Which, what I would say, historically have been 2 battlefield supremacy categories that you could never take together. So that's a big change as well.
But what I would say is that, you are, if in order to do this with fixed objectives and actually score a high secondary score, you would have to sacrifice a lot of units each turn. So you probably need a very MSU army, and you might not be able to keep up with that attrition across the course of the entire game. But yeah, we'll see. That's the first. Those 2 are kind of the similar battlefield supremacy style ones, and now we've got 2 more actiony ones.
Why don't you run us through a new one, which is called Cleanse, which I think is really interesting.
So Cleanse is really interesting. So it's an action. Well, it's not called an action, but it's at the start of your shooting phase. It's not even at the start. It's in your shooting phase. You can do it at any point in your shooting phase. You select 1 or more units from your army that are not battle shocked, and they also have to be eligible to shoot. So they can't be units that have advanced unless you have a special rule like the Space Marine Devastator Doctrine, which allows them to advance and still be eligible to shoot, or the
an assault weapon.
No, assault weapons, that allows you to shoot that weapon, but it doesn't mean you're eligible to shoot, is my take on it. I don't think
Oh,
if you advance and you have an assault weapon on your profile, you can necessarily do this. But maybe we need a bit of clarification on that.
okay, yeah.
And then that unit is then not able to shoot or declare a charge. At the end of your turn, each objective marker, and it has to be outside your deployment zone, that has one or more of these selected units within range, counts as being cleansed by your army. And you score
Nice.
VP depending on how many objectives you're on.
Mhm.
If you have one objective marker that's been cleansed, you score 2 VP. If you gain an extra VP for tactical missions. If you have 2 objective markers or more that are cleansed, you score 4 VP for your fixed missions and +1 for tactical. So this could be good depending on the mission format. Let me scroll through and see.
I was just doing the exact same thing. I take it Vic and I are both looking at the mission deployments right now. I think this one is very powerful. I think this one's very, very, very good and will be a premium one to take. The reason why, there's a couple of caveats on there. You do not need to control the objective marker. Oh, sorry. That is within your deployment zone that you control or has one or more of the selected units within range is cleansed by your army. So you do need to control the objective marker, but it's in your shooting phase and after you've moved. Now, spoiler alert, there's no banners. So this is kind of a replace of banners, right? And if we look at this compared to banners, it's actually significantly easier. Even if you do, say, for example, you play through the game, you do it 3 times for 1 objective marker, and then you do it twice for 2 objective markers. That's effectively a total of 14 points right there. Now, that was probably going to be the bare minimum that you ever need to achieve. So if you've got like a speeder, for example, you can zoom over and do it. If you go first, it's very easy to do 2 as well. This one seems really, really solid in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I think it also, unlike the other 2, which tend to favor like the deep striky, fast moving little armies, this one could favor the armies which are more slower and progressive up the board. But still, I also like that it is making you consider you can't make your massive hammer unit holding these objectives because then they can't charge, shoot, or do anything like that.
Yeah.
You need a couple of little chaffy units that go and do these little actions for you at the same time.
But they're not actions. And I will take a side point right here. There is no definition of an action in the core rules, and I think that was a really bad move because I thought actually actions was the one piece of watertight rules that they've actually ever written. So I don't know why they got rid of them. Like they just took all their good work and threw it out the door. Apparently.
Yep.
So a little bit of an interesting decision. Yeah.
Do you want to hit up the next one, Dave? The next.
What's the next one?
It's deploy teleport homers.
Okay, cool. Deploy teleport homers. This was actually an OG secondary, if I remember correctly. This used to be another one. So in your shooting phase, you can select 1 unit from your army that is not battle shocked. So a pretty common theme here that is eligible to shoot. So this is kind of like the action qualifier, so to speak, right? Until the end of your turn, that unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. So the same as cleanse. At the end of your turn, if that unit is within your opponent's deployment zone or within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, within 6 inches of the center, not wholly within, and not wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, just 2 very distinct points there. It deploys a teleport homer at that location. So there's no qualification of what that actually means. You need to place a marker, but it doesn't say so. So you don't need to, I don't think.
Yeah.
This secondary mission is achieved, and you score the number of VP depending on where the teleport homer was deployed as follows. If you deploy it in the center of the board, you get 2 VP or 3 for tactical. Opponent's deployment zone, you get 4 VP, which is really big. So if I'm reading this correctly, Vic, you get 6 VP if you do the center and your opponent's deployment zone.
You can only select 1 unit in your army to do it. So you could only do one or the other.
Yes, you're completely correct, of course. So you can do your opponent's deployment zone for 4 VP, potentially. So, or you could do the center of the battlefield. Actually, that's a lot worse than I thought, actually. But it does combo with behind enemy lines, right?
Well, I think the big thing about this is that it says if the unit's within, so you only need like a tiny bit of your army in there. And it's much easier to do that rather than wholly within. And you could probably like stretch out a unit from your deployment zone towards the center of the battlefield for this quite comfortably. But you're right, there's some drawbacks to this. I do think this might be surprisingly better than we think when you consider like rapid ingress and the 3-inch deep striking things. Very easy to get into the opponent's deployment zone, even if it's just a little bit of your unit. You can stretch all the way back out, so when you remove casualties, you get into a safe position. There's some power there. So
interesting.
Yeah, I'm a bit higher on this one than Cleanse, to be honest.
Really? Oh,
Yeah, which
fantastic! I
is
love it
yeah,
that we've
got a
got.
difference of opinion.
I love it. I love it. Now, just to clarify, we did do some discussion a couple of days ago about the eligibility to shoot. Now, I believe that that means if you've got a ranged weapon, you are eligible to shoot. You don't have to be within range to be able to shoot that weapon or line of sight. So basically, if you've got a ranged weapon and even if you can't target or shoot anything, you're still technically eligible to shoot.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a ranged weapon, you cannot do that. So it has to be a unit with a ranged weapon, which I guess all those Marines have pistols and stuff in here, right? So not too bad. We've got two more. We've got one more before we go into the stock standard ones. So tell me about Storm Hostile Objectives.
Storm Hostile Objectives. I've seen this a few times in 9th edition, this kind of thing. It's quite straightforward. It matches the kind of the long war or one of the Harlequin's deadly performance requirements. At the end of your turn, if either of the below conditions are satisfied, you score 4 VP if you're using fixed missions or +1 for tactical. And the main condition is you control one or more objective that was controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn. So you basically steal an objective off the opponent. You get
shock
4
tactics.
VP. Bang. Yeah, shock tactics. You also score this if your opponent does not control any objective markers and you control a new one that you did not at the start of your turn. So just in case they're not standing on anything, you can still score this objective. Interestingly, it's got a bit of a restriction here. It cannot be achieved during the first battle round. And if you randomly draw it via tactical objectives in the first battle round, you have to draw a new secondary mission and shuffle it back into your deck.
Very interesting. Where are you on this one? This will be interesting.
I personally think this is the one you should never pick as a fixed one.
Yes.
The big thing about fixed is that it gives a lot of information to your opponent. They know your game plan at this point. They can kind of screen out all their deep strikes in your deployment zone to block out behind enemy lines.
Yep.
And, like being conservative and giving up primary so your opponent doesn't get secondary has always been quite effective, I've found, against people who take shock tactics or the long war.
Definitely.
So I think this gives too much agency to your opponent to play against you.
And you raised a really good point, which is something I want to touch on too, is that when you take fixed, you effectively take 2 secondaries for the whole game, which is 2/3 of what you would previously have. And when you've only got 2 ways to play the mission, apart from the primary, it's that much easier for your opponent to attack your secondaries. Previously you had secondaries like, I've got 3 ones, and then one of them is my army one, and then your opponent looks at it and says, well, you took Assassinate, I can potentially 0 you on that if I play completely passive or do something else. Now that there's only 2, that's a lot more straightforward to do. So I think players coming in 10th edition will be, if you take fixed missions, a lot more attuned to saying, well, you've only got these 2 qualifications to do, I can attack one of those very effectively.
And really knock your secondary score right down.
Exactly, yeah. So that's a big risk. Now we've got 2 stock standard ones, Assassinate and Bring It Down. Right, if your opponent has 20 points on Assassinate, you probably still don't take it. If they have 30 points, you probably do take it if you have 2 Death Jesters. So if your opponent is playing Knights, you take Bring It Down. So what I think about these 2 ones is interesting is that if you normally take tactical missions, so if you normally randomly draw cards, if you play against Knights, are you taking fixed all of a sudden, Vic, for Bring It Down?
See, I think these 2 are the most powerful fixed secondaries, and I think these 2 are the ones where you may go fixed because of them.
Right.
Now, I'll make a counterpoint to the Assassinate thing, because I think characters are much easier to deal with in this edition compared to the previous edition.
Word.
Characters are attached to units but don't have a kind of you cannot target this unit thing unless they're a lone operative. So I think if we do have significantly more indirect fire and, let's say, easier ways of getting access to precision in order to target characters and units, I have a feeling that characters may be really challenging to hide if your army can provide a lot of indirect fire. And I think that's when Assassinate, even if you get Assassinate for 4 and you get 16 VP on it, and then you can set up very well for one of these kind of engage on all fronts or behind enemy lines, I think that's actually a very strong secondary plan, in my opinion.
That is a hot take. I am. We're gonna have to see how this pans out, folks. But I am in the opposite category. I think characters are going to be harder to kill. Maybe that's just me. They're in bodyguard units. You have to chew through a lot of ablative wounds, but it does matter, yes, if you have access to precision. But I think this is going to be a specialized one. If your army has the capability of doing it, like we know Eldar, for example, or Aeldari, have the psychic ability that you can target characters and you can automatically 6 the damage. So in that scenario, yeah, fantastic. Maybe if you've got Death Jesters or something as well, you could do that. But well, I mean, yeah, it totally depends on the prevalence of characters, and at the end of the day, how easy they are going to be to target. We do know that you can have, according to the core rules, if your character is not visible, you cannot even use your precision weapons to shoot the character. If you're shooting at an attached unit, which is a leader plus a bodyguard, right?
So while we're talking about assassinate on the tactical mission side of this, I think this secondary is going to have a big impact on how people build their lists, because I think this is one of the small number of secondaries that can actually be locked out at the list building stage. If you only have 1 or 2 characters that are very hidden, very protected, more defensive rather than offensive, and your opponent draws assassinate on their tactical missions, it can almost force them to either discard it, and that means they're not scoring it, or to use the new order stratagem to get a new one in.
Yep.
And I think if you have 5 or 6 characters and they draw assassinate and they pick up 3 in a turn, that is devastating on the secondary, and you can't allow that to be built into your list.
Yep.
So I think this is. So I'm still on the train of it might be an option for fix, but I think people are not going to build their list to give up this many characters.
Yeah. I think Bring It Down is similar as well. Now, if you draw Bring It Down through the randomized method, you get 2 VP for every vehicle that you kill that's above, or monster that's above 10 plus wounds. So that's actually, if your opponent draws that and then goes all of a sudden, and you've only got 3 vehicles, your opponent goes, well, actually, I can try and focus them down this turn and still score a good amount of VP. So that's something to consider as well, is that you're going to have to consider, well, my opponent could draw Bring It Down. Should I overextend my vehicles, etc., etc.? There's a lot of layers of depth to that, which is actually for the game really, really awesome. Bring It Down is essentially always is the same as before as well. One thing, there's a secondary here that I've realized, it's a killy one. I'll give you a hint. It's in the No Mercy, No Respite category that is no longer exist, which I think is massive for the game.
Oh yeah, it's No Prisoners is? Oh no, that's
you're right.
No Prisoners is there in tactical, but not in fixed.
Yes, but you can't take it if you can't take it against your opponent's army as a fixed method, right? Which is huge. I think that's massive.
But you're right. That whole mechanism is gone, actually. No Prisoners isn't even like that anymore.
Exactly. So, if you rock up with 300 Termagants, there is, your opponent can't just go, well, I'm going to take No Prisoners for an auto 20 here. That's massive.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's huge. And a lot of armies were hindered by the amount of points that they gave up for No Prisoners, right? Because definitely. No Mercy, No Respite was previously such an easy... there was a category that not many people had access to good secondaries in. So that's huge. I think that's massive.
That's awesome. Oh, so just to come back to the assassinate, bring it down thing, and even storm hostile objectives on the tactical side, because I think that's way more interesting here, is that, let's say you're playing a game, Dave. We're playing a game, and you're 9 cards deep on turn 3. Maybe we're playing one of the missions where you draw 3, discard 2.
Sure.
And you still haven't drawn assassinate, bring it down, and storm hostile objectives. So I know there's like a pretty much like almost less than a 1 in 2 chance you're going to draw one of these here. I'm
going to stop you right there because your math is wrong. Because I could potentially see 4 cards out of the remaining 7 because I could use the stratagem to see another card as well.
Okay, so yeah, you can a lot. You really have good odds of kind of seeing the remaining, getting one of these. So I think at that point, a very important tactic is considering, okay, if they draw assassinate here, I'm going to, I could take them down to 0 VP. So my character, instead of going forward this turn, is just going to step back. I'm going to play this a bit more passively, count my points. Same with Bring It Down. My support platform on 1 wound left is going right into the back corner of my board and ready to phantasm if needed. And then storm hostile objectives, I'm going to hold less primary this turn so that you can't score this secondary. So I think it's going to be really interesting how keeping track of what secondaries have already been drawn by your opponent will impact the way that you actually play the game.
Yes. I think this is going to be a massive skill separation between those players that are very successful in the game in 10th and those players that are struggling to break and win tournaments. Playing around this this kind of way of seeing the game and your potential outcomes and doing the math on cards remaining in your deck and tracking your opponent's deck is going to be very, very important. That's a very critical skill that transfers across from other games. And, if you've got that background, then great. But it's not that complicated. You can always keep track. And I would suggest, I really love this idea, is that, have a little check sheet of which of your opponent's secondaries they've done throughout the game. And then you can go, well, the only available ones left are this, this, and this. Ask your opponent how many cards are left in their deck. And then you can be like, okay, the odds are, 1 in 4 to achieve this, to see this one right here, right? So something basic you can do throughout the game. If you're really fast, you can do that in your head already. And I think as people play more and more, they're probably going to be like, okay, there's going to be a couple here that you can play around, like Assassinate, Bring It Down, Storm Hostile Objective, like you said, and then a couple that you can't play around at all, like Behind Enemy Lines, for example. So those are they're going to be a couple of key ones that are going to stick out with you always and be like, just in the back of your head, just think, maybe if they drew this right now, how could I play around that?
Yeah. And initially when I was reading these secondaries and identifying one or two which were really hard to do, I was a little bit worried, thinking, oh my God, you can't play tactical. What if like for 2 turns of the game, you just draw 4 that you can never do?
Yeah.
You're just going to be stuck. But actually the ability to discard, redraw 1, and then also some of the mission objectives letting you get access to more means that, tactical actually does pan out pretty well.
Yeah. So speaking of tactical, these are the ones that reward you with a bounty of points. Now we've got something that they removed, which I don't know why they removed the secondary, because the secondary was actually not bad. It was called Investigate Signals, and it's got the same name here again as well. Now, once again, we harken back to the same action, non-action shooting phase, eligible to shoot thing. Fantastic. In your shooting phase, you can select 1 or more units from your army that are not battle shock, so another key, non-battle shock, which is good, and are eligible to shoot. Until the end of your turn, the units you selected are not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. Great. So we could have just said perform an action and removed a bunch of words there. All right, that's the last time I mentioned that one. At the end of your turn, each corner of the battlefield that has 1 or more of these selected units wholly within 9 inches of it is scanned by your army. If 1 or more corners are scanned by your army, the secondary mission is achieved. You score 2 VP for each corner scanned by your army this turn. So let's say you draw this one on turn 1, and you go, well, okay, I'll scan it's a deployment zone that looks like Dawn of War. You go, okay, I'll just scan both of my backfield objective corners for VP. That's quite good. And there is only one mission which is the corners deployment, where you'll only have access to do this in 1 corner on turn 1 if you don't move from your deployment zone. So yeah, that's the first tactical one, which is already straight off the bat like really good. 4 VP, boom. That's the same as having 4 units and 4 quarters for engage on all fronts already.
Just have to remember, you got to be wholly within 9, so you have to be pre-prepared for this in most cases, I'd expect. I think as a bare minimum, you got to make sure you have 1 unit to score 2 VP on this. Because if you get stuck with this and you're not able to score it, and then you have an extra turn to wait before you actually score it, I think that's actually a real drop in momentum. You've got to be able to score 2 VP, discard this card, get a new one in the next turn. I actually think this is a little bit fiddly, and it's one that's going to take us a little bit of time to get used to. I think there's going to be a lot of situations where you draw this card and you're like, oh, I got my unit slightly out of place. I can't actually get wholly within 9 without advancing here.
But I think this one combos excellently with units that deep strike or outflank as single models, because it's going to be tough for your opponent to play around too. They're going to have to be like, I have to deep strike screen the corner because you've got your little Lictor or Ripper Swarm or something that can come in, and that'll be, as opposed to 4 VP, 6 VP, right?
Yeah, and I think deep striking. Look at this. As we're getting through this, we're building more and more elements into our list design,
Yeah.
and these are kind of core elements that you will consider in your list design. Like, I have to have things which can score, investigate signals,
Hmm.
and if I draw it, I want to be able to get 6 points on it. That's
Yeah.
that's quality.
So a
Uh,
unit that you can actually maybe deep strike and or rapid ingress to play aggressively with, or deep strike to score a secondary, potentially a lot more valuable, right? So I'm going back to the like Lictor or the Von Reaper or something like that.
mhm.
I'm just referencing those because those are the ones that we've seen the
Yeah.
full data sheets for. So yeah, definitely interesting. Now the boy that we've lost, no prisoners. How's it changed, Vic?
So this is awesome. No prisons now. While this
Yeah.
secondary is active, each time an enemy unit is destroyed, you score 2 VP, but this goes to a maximum of 5 VP.
Hmm.
If a unit is destroyed and then resurrected, you still score the points. And if you score any points from this secondary, it's discarded. So if you score 2 or 4 or the maximum of 5, it's discarded at the end of the turn.
Exactly.
So this is
Yeah.
solid, I think.
Codex Warfare for everyone, I suppose, right?
Yeah, no, this is a really good one. And if you draw this is one of the ones that you'll feel comfortable in most situations being able to achieve.
So one thing's interesting, if you draw this on turn one and you go first and you can't shoot your opponent's army or charge them, potentially it's a discard here, right?
Yeah, potentially, but I'm expecting the majority of strong armies now are going to be built around a bit of indirect fire elements.
Yeah.
Based on pretty much every indirect we're seeing as they get released is decent.
Yeah. But historically, the secondary has been incredible.
Mhm.
By that, I mean Codex Warfare. 2 VP for every killer unit is... If you're not doing that, what are you doing? Now, next one, we've got Extend Battle Lines. This is a new one. At the end of your turn, if you control one or more objective markers in your deployment zone, and you also control one or more objective markers in no man's land, this secondary mission is achieved and you score 5 VP. If you only have one unit remaining in your army, then the secondary mission is instead achieved at the end of your turn if that unit controls one objective marker in no man's land. But in this instance, you score 2 VP instead of 5. So this is insanely easy. It is probably the best secondary ever. You hold your one in your deployment zone. If you're not doing that, you've lost the game anyway. And then you need to score one in no man's land, which obviously could be one that's close to your deployment zone already. And if you're not doing that, you're probably losing the game anyway. So extremely competitive. I think you're going to be very happy whenever you see this one come up in the deck of cards that you draw, right?
Yeah, so that's 3 good tactical only
Yeah.
secondaries that we've just done, which are all completely achievable. And then we move on to Defense Stronghold. So at the end of your opponent's turn, or at the end of the battle, whichever comes first, if you control one or more objective in your own deployment zone, the secondary mission is scored, and you score 3 VP.
Great.
Okay. So that's number 4 there.
Yes, so
it can't be achieved in the first battle round though. So if you do draw it, then you just draw a new secondary mission, but you do shuffle this one back into your deck for later use.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, once again, extremely easy. All these 4 secondaries have been easier than all of the fixed secondaries to score. And they're just deployment primary zone focused as well, right? So really solid. Imagine if you could score this one on the first turn. You just, yep, and your opponent goes first. You go, and then you go, okay, I've done the secondary already. But and it's really good. Scoring at the end of your opponent's turn is very, very good as well, because you're going to get a new card in your command phase. So you can potentially, if you go second, and it's second turn, score this, and then draw a new card and then score those as well, which is really, really good too.
Yeah, it gives a little bit of agency to your opponent to try and knock you off your own home objective, but usually that's historically been very tough to do.
Yes. Oh, in case anyone didn't know, you have to play with these secondaries face up, so your opponent knows which secondary you have, of course. Next, we've got Overwhelming Force. While the secondary mission is active, each time an enemy unit that has started the turn within range of an objective marker is destroyed, you get 3 VP to a maximum of 5. And it says, note that VP is scored even if such a unit is subsequently resurrected, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, this is I don't want to say a better version than No Prisoners, but it's really good because there's actually a lot of units now that get bonuses to wound or rerolls to wound if they target units on objectives as well. So potentially in some missions, this might be deniable by your opponent, but all in all, I mean, 3 VP if you kill a unit on your opponent on an objective, then that's great. And I'm just going to read here. Each time an enemy unit that has started the turn within range of an objective marker is destroyed, you get 3 VP. So even if your opponent has 2 units on an objective, on the same objective, you destroy both of them, you get your 5 VP there as well. So it doesn't have to be different objective markers as well.
Interestingly, your little command phase grow a unit back onto an objective thing.
Mm-hmm.
That unit would technically have not started on the turn on an objective. Oh, you never know. But the big power of these things is that you draw the card at the start of your command phase, so your opponent hasn't really had a chance to prepare against this necessarily. So I think this is also a very solid secondary.
Yeah, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of these, if you are not doing throughout the course of a naturally played game, something is going terribly wrong to begin with, right? So these all naturally play into the way the game should be played. Now, but there are 2 that are hard. Secure no man's land. At the end of your turn, if you control 2 or more objective markers in no man's land, the secondary is achieved and you score 5 VP. Now, if at the end of your turn you only control 1 objective marker in no man's land, the secondary is still achieved, but in this instance you score 2 VP instead of 5. So, Stranglehold-esque. Stranglehold was extremely powerful when it was out. It's probably the best secondary ever printed, I would say. And 5 VP is a huge chunk of cash for just being able to control 2 objectives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, when it says you can only score 2 VP for holding 1 objective, I think a lot of times people will only go for the 2 VP.
1 second. We've got a communication breakdown.
Oh.
Dave DeVic.
Can you hear me?
You're back. Here we go.
Yeah, awesome. So, I'm trying to break this down into how much VP you need to get per turn to keep going, and ideally you need to be aiming for 4, don't you, per objective to try and hit the max. 8 for your 2 objectives. So really, you do want to be aiming for the 5, but I think a lot of times you've also got to be careful of how many units you're throwing away. So I think a lot of times this one might be scored for only 2 VP. But that's fine. Score it for 2 VP, discard it. You've dropped a few points. It's not the end of the world. So I think, again, this is another one which is very achievable. You won't be locked out with this one. So what are we on now? 6, which we can do.
And that one's interesting. If you go first and you just have like a cheeky speeder or something, then, put it in there.
5.
Get your 5.
Done. Yeah. And then you can score a little bit less on another one to compensate.
Exactly, yeah.
If you want.
Gives you a little bit of redundancy there. Area denial. Sorry, I know I'm running back to back.
Yeah, you do. Go for
At the end of your turn, if 1 or more units from your army, excluding battle shock units. Ooh, that's really interesting, actually.
Okay.
The previous ones have not been excluding battle shock units. So that's really interesting. So actually, investigate signals. No prisoners, extend battle lines. I'm doing this really fast, so I might be wrong. Defend stronghold. Overwhelming force, secure no man's land. You can achieve with battle shock units.
It's very true.
Yeah. So interesting. So this is the first no battle shockage. At the end of your turn, if 1 or more units from your army, excluding battle shock units, are wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, and there are no enemy units wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, this secondary mission is achieved and you score 5 VP.
Oh, very good.
This is a good one too. And it's at the end of your turn, so it's not Oath of Moments at the end of the battle round. And a very direct game plan for this one, isn't it, Vic?
Yeah, I mean, it gets even better because let's say there's a really strong enemy unit wholly within 6 of the center. There's an extra bit where you can still score it if there are no enemy units within 3 of the center of the battlefield. So if they're just kind of wholly within 6, but not actually within 3 inches, you can still score 3 VP from this, which gives some nice little tactical flexibility. But that does say within, not wholly within the 3 inches. Yeah. So even if they have 1 model just within that 3 inches, they'll stop
you know what interests me about this one is that I don't think very often an opponent is going to have a unit within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield.
Wholly within 6. That's you're right.
Very tough because your opponent's going to have to go, well, if they draw area denial, I need to have something here. And then they need to go calculate, well, it needs to be something substantial, otherwise they just destroy it anyway. Exactly. And then they're going to go, well, I'm just not going to put anything in there. If you draw area denial, 5 VP. That's pretty insane. So I think this one might be the best that we've seen so far, actually.
You love all of them.
They're all so good, but the next 2 are quite bad. I'll run through these.
The first 7 have been really good, and it starts getting more tough now.
So, attempting target. I love the name of this one too. When the secondary mission is drawn, your opponent must select 1 objective marker in no man's land. At the end of your turn, if you control that selected objective marker, the secondary mission is achieved. You score 5 VP. A lot more difficult, depending on the mission, though. So, depending on the terrain format and the mission, if I look at Hammer and Anvil, all the objective markers are pretty close to equal distance to people's deployment zones. Dawn of War is sort of like that as well, maybe, but your opponent can obviously just pick the one they're going to stack their whole flank of their army on, can't they?
Yeah. I mean, I think whenever I think about all of these secondaries, I keep thinking of like Drukhari with really fast melee choppy units that come out of transports, extending their threat range, going and like taking an objective no matter what. And I think that kind of army is going to be really strong here, like melee coming out of transports and physically placing themselves onto objectives. That will help across the board with these secondaries.
At the end of your turn, this is the last one, capture enemy outposts. At the end of the turn, if you control one or more objective markers in your opponent's deployment zone, the secondary mission is achieved and you score 8 victory points. This is an interesting one. I've got a hot take, but I'm going to wait for Vic's analysis here.
So it says one or more, but there's only...
I guess maybe you could move them or something.
Oh, yeah. One of the missions, you can move the objectives around, so you could have more. But otherwise, you start off with only one objective in your deployment zone. I think this is the one that you can get locked out of very often.
Yep.
There's no option to discard it if it's turn 1 or anything like that. So I think this is the one where New Orders is going to get hit on a lot.
Yep.
What do you think, Dave?
I think this is actually very, very good in turns 4 and 5, though. Because this is actually the highest scoring secondary you can ever get. And if you're playing an open game that's broken up, right, then your opponent is very unlikely to think about playing around this. And actually, if you're on the back foot, 8 victory points is a huge opportunity to catch back up on the game. So potentially a mechanism that I think a lot of games are going to be like, there are going to be games, not a lot, but there are going to be games where your opponent goes, oh yeah, I was crushing him, and then he clawed back a bit, and then he drew capture enemy outpost and got 8 VP, which is a huge comeback potential, right? But at the same time, if you draw it early, it's awful.
So that's a really good point, because that brings me into my little bit of worry about this entire system. And exactly what you said, the difference between drawing capture enemy outpost on turn 1, or say drawing capture enemy outpost and assassinate on turn 1, compared to on turn 4, where you can actually score capture enemy outpost, and let's say you can kill 2 or 3 characters, because that's often when that happens in the game. That is a swing of, it could be as much as 16 VP there, which is huge. And that's my worry with this entire system. There's a little area of RNG in there, randomness, that can really swing games entirely. But I guess it's the same with dice.
Yeah, so I guess the argument being that dice, you roll so many of that it averages out. But I guess the way that Magic tackles this, they have the mulligan system, right? So you could mulligan your hand and then you get 1 reduced card, for example. They have got mechanisms like that built into the game, obviously with the 3 ways we discussed to regenerate or refresh your cards. It'll be interesting to see, I think, that if there are more unit data sheets that allow you to filter through secondaries. I suspect they won't print anything like that because it kind of operates outside of the game on a kind of kitchen tabletop sense. But so we've talked through the tactical and the random. There is so much to go through here, but what are your third impressions? Because I know we've been through this a couple of times.
So third impression currently is, I think the tactical missions are good enough here, with enough ways for you to cycle through your cards to allow you to actually play a relatively consistent game plan with a balanced army, where you just playing the game without overcommitting, without doing anything too out of the ordinary, are able to score your secondaries across the course of the game. So I think tactical is probably going to be the norm, in my opinion. And I think there may be some small edge cases where you take fixed instead.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting. I think that the way that they've done this is actually quite good. I don't like the concept in general. I'm going to put it out there. I don't like the random concept in general. I think the way that we had secondaries before was very interesting and allowed for a great competitive standpoint. But I think that they've done it well. They've recognized that there needs to be a payoff for taking tactical, and there needs to be a disincentivization to taking fixed. And they've actually hit the nail on the head there. I think I'd give them a very good passing grade for the way that they've designed this. I think it's going to be very exciting to play the secondaries, whereas previously it was quite linear.
I agree.
So really, really cool. We've got the We've got okay. I've got a little bit of a challenge. I'm going to set myself.
Okay.
I want to win a tournament where I've gambited someone every single game. The reason I say that is because I think gambits are terrible. uh, Gambits effectively, I'll rush this off the top of my head.
Yeah,
On
go on
turn
then.
3, you effectively forego your ability to score the primary mission, which
Mm-hmm.
is the majority of the points you can score, it's 50
Mm-hmm.
points. And instead of that, if you accomplish this in the end of the battle, you score 30 victory points. So, just to put that in perspective, you could basically score one turn of primary, and then you have to forego it on your third turn. So, you basically score one turn of primary, and then you begin your gambit. Now, we won't go into all the gambits because, in all seriousness, they're written quite poorly and they're quite difficult to digest. So on a podcast format, they're
They're
not
just kind
gonna.
of funny, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't think anyone will ever gambit, but I think where people will gambit is this. I think they've actually got this completely wrong here. I think they've tried to design a system where you go, oh, there was one chance I got, and I gambited him, and yeah, I rolled a 12, and yes, I gambited him, and I just clinched it by 2 points with the delaying tactics thing or something like that. I evacuated my troops. I don't think that's going to happen at all. I think the only chance you're going to gambit someone is when you're utterly destroying them. The game has probably gone something like this. Turn 1, your opponent shows too much of their army. You blow it off the board. Turn 2, you're basically tabling them. Turn 3, they haven't got many models left, and you go, fuck it, I'm going to gambit. In the circumstance where you are definitely going to gambit someone anyway. And then you're going to brag to your friends, yeah, I gambited that guy. I don't know. They seem extremely difficult to achieve. So I think the challenge is if you can gambit more than 3 times in a tournament, in a 5-round tournament, you've got some secondary prize that you should get.
Oh my gosh. I think this is so. I think the overarching theme is that they made everything more interesting and engaging, more dynamic. The games will be more varied. The Gambit is part of that, but I think maybe it's more not for competitive play. It's more for just like playing at your local gaming club, having a laugh, and like, you know what, Dave,
Yeah.
I'm going to go for him. I'm going for an orbital strike on you. Rather than actually anything you'll consistently see in competitive play. So I think it won't have an impact on the game. I don't think there's going to be situations where, it's going to be extremely rare that there's situations where you've lost a game because of a gambit in competitive play.
Yeah. So that's covered the secondaries. We're not going to go into the mission rule deck because that is a huge thing as well. We need to think about that. But Vic, do you think that after reading through and going through this again, you're going to look at a list design that's a little bit different because of the secondary format?
Yeah, I think some of these secondaries you do need to build for and consider. I mean, some armies will never be able to deny on their list on things like Bring It Down, but certainly I think people will bring less characters for Assassinate, and they'll also consider carefully characters that go forward and kill themselves, because if your opponent draws Assassinate on the right turn, it can be really detrimental to your cause. But overall, I think small, fast MSU deep strike is going to be the way to go for scoring. And I think armies that have more of that will consider them better at their secondary scoring. And, that's already a concept that exists at the moment, but I think it'll be even more exaggerated going into 10th edition.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the secondaries I was just re-looking at there again was investigate signals, where you need to be within the table quarter edges, table corners to score. And I thought, if you're playing knights or something, you need to be wholly within 9 inches. It's quite difficult, and there's not going to be any terrain over there, so your knight's just going to be exposed. So, that if you're playing an army list like that, you really need to consider maybe having a game plan that's just engage on all fronts, or maybe behind enemy lines, maybe probably not, right? But you're going to hope to draw into the tactical section where you're drawing more of those hold objective ones, for example. So I think what this does is it actually breathes a little bit of fresh air into those data sheets that previously didn't really have a role, right? Because something like engage on all fronts was minimum 3 models, 6 inches, that just became really difficult to achieve for so many things. Whereas now, you've got to have a unit that can maybe deep strike into the table quarter edge, or, you want to get behind enemy lines for a turn or something like that, which makes maybe something that's hasn't got a stellar data sheet in terms of its output or its defensive profile, but maybe is just cheap and has a movement ability that has a small base, a lot more tempting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with those points. I want to raise one concern, Dave.
Sure.
So I hope that the way, because with secondary missions, there has to be constant updates to the mission format, like little tweakings and updates. And we saw that in ninth edition where they introduced faction secondaries as they went on. In this case, we have a good set of 16 that have been balanced, well thought out. What I hope they do is with each kind of chapter approved each year, they just take these, maybe change a couple of them in and out, keep the deck of 16, and just do little updates and tweaks to them. What I think may happen, though, is that they may introduce significantly more secondaries that you can then sub in and out of your deck or add onto your deck. And I think those are the times when Games Workshop have shown they really struggle with game balance.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but I'm keeping my faith low.
Yeah, because obviously, if you have the ability, and by the way, guys, we don't know, but maybe if I think Tyranids getting one of the books soon or something. But if you get your faction secondaries like we had them previously, you all of a sudden you pick all random, and then you take out two that are really hard, like attempting target and capture enemy outposts. And all of a sudden you have extremely consistent game plan. You've removed 50% of the bad options in your 16 card deck and replaced them with two obviously good ones. So yeah.
Yeah, if they do it carefully, though, I think it will be really interesting because adding a couple of faction secondaries that allow you to play to the style that your faction thematically plays can be really good if done carefully and in a balanced way. And that shouldn't be hard if they're releasing them one codex at a time.
Yeah.
But they've got to be super careful with it, and historically they just haven't been.
Yeah, so they've developed a new concept here, Vic. I guess they had mails from cards previously, but what is your out of 10 kind of rating for the secondary kind of game plan? Do you think they've hit the nail on the head? Do you think they've missed a couple of things? Do you think there's some huge problems that they haven't thought of? Or
I'm going to give them for this a clean, straight 10 out of 10. I think they've absolutely nailed it.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, I cannot see an error here. I think they've nailed it.
Oh my word, that is incredible. 10 out of 10. I was going to go maybe an 8.5, 9. But 10 out of 10 from the man himself. That is, and trust me,
if
praise does not come lightly.
If you sat me down with this for a week, I would not be able to do a better job than what they've done. I think they've nailed it.
I really like something that they've done is I've just realized it through the nuance of talking is that the battle shock aspect of it is really interesting as well. I thought that was a really cool way to balance out the tactical and fixed. I think that fixed might be a little bit weak. Just reading through them, but we'll have to see how the armies play out because obviously, guys, at the end of the day, the secondaries don't matter if your opponent doesn't have any models on the table. So 40k has always had the ability to just completely destroy your opponent's army. And, there's also now a really interesting balance trade-off between, do I just try and table my opponent and then take fixed and score, 25 on average out of my 40 secondaries? Or do I play a list that gets 40 out of 40 secondaries and maybe gets solid 35 on the primary or something like that, right? We'll have to see.
Oh, very exciting times.
There you go. I really like what they've done. I hope that there is some commentary around when you draw the cards and how you discard them and or etc. Just the way that it's written in the document that we've got is not exactly straightforward. I think there's probably some physical formatting reasons why they haven't done or made things a bit more clearer. But I would like, and this is really difficult because you write these rules and you spend months writing them. They seem so easy to understand, but I think there are some instances where there's perhaps a little bit of ambiguity or just really hard to understand, right? Like Gambits, there's a lot to going on there. But yeah, you're not going to be taking them anyway. So there we go. Episode 27. We'll be going through the secondaries. That was fun. That was maybe my favorite episode.
Yeah,
that was really good, really exciting. We're going to be going through the core rules at some point. We're going to be going through the missions, I suppose, as well. There is so much changing on the missions, guys. But at the end of the day, we're going to try and keep it competitive so that you guys can get the insight that you need to get the early edge on 10th edition. Now, I don't think there's any reason why you can't start playing 10th edition games yourself. I'm going to be having a game later this week. We've got lists out that you don't know the points for, but you know as a 2,000 point army. You've got all the rules here. I think once you get started and get going, you're going to find it really easy to pick up.
Oh, that's such a good idea, actually. We should do a game, Dave.
We should do a game. I'm playing demons. Let's go. Sounds good. This is the Fireside podcast. Signing off. We wish you good health wherever you are. Hope you enjoy listening. Thanks for coming.
See you next time, guys. Bye.
You've been listening to the 40k Fireside podcast. If you really enjoy our content, Vic and I would greatly appreciate it if you left a like, comment, or subscribe to our channel. We also really appreciate if you leave a review or comment on one of our social media posts as well. Have a good evening.